Hilchas Tumas Ochlin Perik Sheni. Kol ha'ochlim ha'gedelim min ha'karka, food that grows from the ground, is eina mekabel tuma ad sheyokru, until they become disconnected from the ground. Avol kol zman she'mechubarim, afilu k'sheirish cotton, that there's a very minimal connection with a small root. Sheichel lichis mena, but this root could give its chayet. This oichel is still being mekabel chayes from the ground through this sheirish. Is eina mekabel tuma, is not mekabel tuma. Now there's a order. Reb Chaim asks that l'chura, every oichel to be mekabel tuma has to become muksher lekabel tuma, and there's a halacha that we'll learn later on that something that's mechuber lekarka so can become muksher lekabel tuma, whereas the hechsher has to be after it's already detached from the ground. So l'chura, why do you need a din that it's not mekabel tuma while it's attached to the ground? Typically, because since it can't become muksher while it's attached to the ground, so it's pashut. If it's not muksher, it's not mekabel tuma. Why do we need this new din that it can't be mekabel tuma while it's attached to the ground? So the ma'aseh is that we'll learn b'hamshich and Perek Gimel that there's a hechatimtza of something that can be mekabel tuma without hechsher, and that would be the chiddush, that something that's attached to the ground can be mekabel hechsher. Now we're saying another din, that something that's mekabel, that's attached to the ground, can be mekabel tumah, and even something that doesn't need hechsher, like we'll learn b'hemshech. So nevertheless, but it's not mekabel tumah if it's attached to the ground, even minimally, a little amount of a connection, a sheirish cotton, but as long as it's connected in a way that it could live from it, so then it's eini mekabel tumah. Halacha Yud Beis. Yicher shel te'ein. If you have a branch of a fig tree, shenivshach, was pulled off, Abo mu'ura, it's still connected only b'klipa she'eni yochel lichias mimenu. In other words, there is still a connection between this branch and the tree, but it's only a branch connection like the bark is connected. It's not really going to nurture anything anymore. Anything on this branch is not going to nurture anything from the tree. So then the din is kola echlin shebei mistamen, the food, the figs that are on this branch, since the branch is no longer being nurturing from the tree, so therefore they're mekabel tumah. However, v'yesh b'davar sofik im hoye shara ilon k'meyad lezeh hayichur shenishbar elei. There's a musa called a yad. So if you have an oichel, and then there's a yad of an oichel, which we'll learn b'hamshach, there's the handle of the oichel. So then if the tumah touches the yad, so the oichel also becomes tummy. So now over here you have oichel, the figs, on this branch, which is no longer really nurturing from the tree. Those figs are considered detached. They're considered oichel, which can be makabel tumah. But sovkol sov b'metzias, they're attached to the tree. So the question is, what happens if you'll have, let's say, a dover tummy, which will touch the tree? Now, so could that tree be considered like a yad to the figs which are on this branch? And memela, the figs will be makabel tumah through the fact that the tumah touched the tree. Or we say no, since the tree be'etzem can be makabel tumah, the tree is be'etzem still mechuber lekarka. So memela, or whatever, the tree can be considered like a yad to this branch. So that's a suffix. Is nachamol. So definitely this oichel could be makabel tumah which are on the branch. The question is, could it be makabel tumah derech the tree? Halacha Gimel. Yirakes sheyavshu bi'ibeim. Whereas you have vegetables that are growing, and in the place where they're growing, they dried out. They dried out they were never detached from the ground. They dried out bi'ibeim. Kigen kruv. Udalas sheyov should be beim. So then eina mistamim tumas ochlin, because once vegetables are dried out, they're not edible anymore. So memela, they're not mistamim tumas ochlin, not because, in other words, they're not being not mistamim because they're attached to the ground, because since they're no longer nurturing from the ground, so they're not really considered attached to the ground. Now they're not being mistamim because they don't have a din of eichel. Now likton liyapshon, you took vegetables which are fresh vegetables, and you will malak it al manas to be miyabishit, and you're not going to use it as eichel. Eventually, you're not going to use it for oichel, but right now it is oichel, and your intent is to be miyabeshit. And nevertheless, harein eichlin shahayu. The fact that you intend of making these waiting with these vegetables until they dry out and using it maybe for firewood, but I'll call upon them at this point in time they're still eichel. Until they become dry and become like eitz. At that point in time, they won't be makabel tumah, like we just learned. The yirak shiv should be beim. Till then, they still have a din of vegetables which are mekabel tumah. Now, ilon shenifshach, you have an ilon which like split, and therefore the ilon is going to die. In other words, the ilon is not going to be able to live. Ubei peris, and there are peris on this ilon, but this ilon is no longer going to be able to live, is the din is arein ketlushin. So the payers that are on this Elon have a din of tlushin. V'chein im yavish Elon, if the Elon dried out, ubei payers, for whatever reason, the Elon dried out and it's no longer nurturing from the ground, is arein ketlushin. So the Nekudas Advarim is that when something is attached to the ground, it's not mekabel tumah. When something is attached to the ground, it's not mekabel tumah. What's attached to the ground? That it's still nurturing from the ground. So if you have something that's still attached, technically it's attached. But on the other hand, it's not nurturing from the ground either, because lepel, the branch, was like so separated from the tree that it's no longer going to get nurturing. It's not going to nurture from the tree anymore, or the tree itself is dried out, or something happened to the tree, and as a result of that, the tree is no longer nurturing from the ground. So Memela, the fruit which is on the branches are no longer nurturing from the ground. So then they're not considered mechubel lekarka. If they're not mechubel lekarka, they can be mekabel tumah. Now halacha hey te'enim sheyavshu b'ibeyim, te'enim that dried out in the place where they're growing, is mitamis tumas ochlin mimkema, because a dried out fig is still edible. Whereas when we're talking about yerokes, dried out yerokes are not edible. Mashenkin dried out figs are edible, so memela, the fact that they dried b'ibeyim, so fakir, they're mitamis tumas ochlin b'ibeyim. In other words, the fact that they dried out means they're no longer attached to the ground. And on the other end, they're still echel, so therefore they're mistamis tumas ochlin mimkema. Halacha vov. Kol ha'echlin shehem mibali chayim, a food that comes from a living being, is eino mekablim tuma ad sheyamusu. They have to die. In other words, in order for them for something alive can never be mekabel tuma. The only thing that's alive that can mekabel tuma is a yid. Anything else that's alive can never be mekabel tuma. So the oichel, in order for it to have a din of tumas ochlin, it has to be that the oichel where it's coming from is no longer alive. Now shachad behema chayav eif, when you went ahead and shechted a behema chayav eif, aval pish adain hey mefarkesim, and memele legabi certain things that has a din of being alive when it's still mefarkes, but nevertheless mekabel tumah, because since you shechted it, and by shechting it you were matered bachila, and you did a ma'isa to shecht it, so therefore the mekabel tumah. Now the pastors you would say that this is talking about behema chayav eif aterim. So memele you were matered bachila, and memele the mekabel tumah. What about tmeim that anyways they're not royal achila and they're mefarkesim? So l'chura the pastors l'chura there would be a svara to think that they are not mekabel tumah. They still have a din of being alive. But lepel the Rambam brings from a meiri that says that this din is lav dafke by a behem of a chayiv eif tor. It's also by a tmeim, which is a chiddush. The Rambam doesn't say it. In the Rambam it's not before this din. Then the Rambam continues v'dogim me'imasai mekabel tumah. When it's considered dag, that it's no longer, that it's already royal lekabel tumah, mi she yomusu. When the dag is yomus dies, so then the dag is royal lekabel tumah. Now noiled behem treifa, they became, in other words, the dag is no longer in the water, and it's nailed behem treifa v'nistamuk shemis nadnedim. In other words, it's still moving. The dag is still moving. It's not completely dead. But on the other hand, it was already nailed bem treifa. You know, something happened to it, which if it would be, it's no longer going to live. So if it would be for example, in a behemoth, would have a din of a treifa. He says, Harei yesh bedavar safik. Over here, there's a safik, and mechshuvim kemesam. In other words, normally, if they wouldn't be nailed bem treifa, they would be in this matzav, they wouldn't be considered mesim. In other words, you took a fish out of the water, and now this fish is misnadnit, it's not mess, so it wouldn't have a din of a mess, and Mamela wouldn't be makabel tumah. But over here, you poked it, no, something happened to the fish, which the fish would have a din of a treifa. No, if there's no din of a treifa by a fish, but there's no musik of a treifa by a fish. But by a behemoth, kiyetzebe would have a din of a treifa. So over here, there's a shaila, aleish b'dav sofik, imhem kshuvim kemesim, if they are considered kemesim, hail v'nitrafu, since they already reached the matzav of a treifa, or ye'ena mekablim tumah, ad sheyidmu ke'evim v'yisnadnu until they stop shaking. Is nachamo. A fish, when you take it out of the water and it's still shaking, doesn't have a din of a mess, and it's not makabel tumah. Once it stops shaking and it's dead, so then it's makabel tumah. Now the shaila is, what about a fish that's still shaking, but on the other end something happened to it which would make it into a treifa? Now the ma'isa is by a behemoth that's a treifa is not makabel tumah. A behemoth that's a treifa is still alive. And Memela is 100% not makabel tumah. So that the fact that the fish is in a matzav of a treifa, it should be makabel tumah. So the pshat, a behemoth that's a treifa, there's still a musik of shchita. there's still a musik of shchita of this behemoth. If you'll take something off this behemoth which is treif as a din of an eva menachai, there's some musik, there's still a chi of shchita on this. There's still a din of shchita. Masha'inkin by a fish, there's no musik of shchita. So Mela, once it's already out of the water and it became a treifa, so even though it's not mamish mes, so there's a svara to say that it has a din of a mess. Weiter, ha'ever ha'basar ha'meduldolim bebehema yichaya. You have an aver or basar which is still attached to the behema b'chala, but it's not attached properly, and eina yichela lichias, it can't really regenerate. It can never regenerate itself. So you have this aver and basar which is hanging out from a behema yichaya, and it could never really reattach itself properly. Is im huchshiru, if this aver basar became mukshir lekabel tuma, is mekabel tuma b'mkeim. In other words, it has already a din of eichel. It's already considered no longer alive. It's not considered part of the live animal. But on the other hand, there wasn't hukshir lekabel tuma. So if it was hukshiru, it has to be mukshir lekabel tuma. So then is mekabel tuma b'mkeim. Pnei sheim chshuvin ke'eichel shepirish, because they're considered like eichel that was separated. Now nishchet to behema. So even though l'chura mitzad echad were saying that they're considered ke'eichel shepirish, but nevertheless the shchita, which is going to bring out dam, is going to cause a hechsher also for this aver. On one hand, we're saying the aver already is considered a separate thing from the behema itself, and therefore this aver has a din of oichel, as it doesn't have a din like a aver which is connected to the behema. It has a din of oichel, and therefore if it will be huchsher, it'll be considered mekabel tumas ochlin. But on the other hand, it's considered fart connected to the behema, that nishchat behema is huchshira b'shchita. It became huchshir b'shchita. Shabehema kula kimeyad le'aver zeh, because einochinami the aver is detached, but on the other end, the behema is a yad to this aver. And v'yad shehuchshir is huchshir aver kula kimeshi yizbar. You don't have to say it's one part in order for it to be huchshir. There's no stira. On one hand, it's separate as a din of eichel, and on the other hand, it's considered a yad to this eichel. It's considered a yad to the eichel. Just like we had a svara b'negeh the tree, that even though the fruit is definitely considered separated from the tree, legabi that it's makabel tuma, then the question was whether the tree has a din of a yad. Masha'inkin b'negeh the behema definitely has a din of a yad to this eichel. V'yesh b'davar sofik im tia ha-behema b'chayel k'meyad le'evei basra amedudolim bo, which is similar to the suffix of the tree. Whereas once the behemoth dies, so then the behemoth for sure is a yad to that aver of the basar hamadud dalaba, and memela with the fact that the blood came out of the behemoth through the shchita, that causes a hechsher also for the aver basar hamadud dalab. Masha'inkin, while the behemoth is alive, so what happens if you pour water on top of the behemoth? Will that be considered a hechsher for that aver basar hamadud dalab? That's the suffix. Al derech, we had the same suffix, but the tree and the branch which is more in this tree. Yeah. Halacha zayin. Hasheichet behema chaya ve'ef is huchsher kol habasar b'dam sheyatsa b'shchita. That's l'chura pasha because it's all one piece. Lefichach im leyatzim em dam b'shchita, the hechsher happens through the dam. If there's no dam that comes out b'shchita, harei kol psaran tzarech hechsher k'chol ha'echel shali huchsher. In other words, when you shech the behema, so now there's oichel, and that oichel could be makabel tuma, but on the other end there's a din that oichel has to have hechsher lekabel tuma. Normally the hechsher happens by the shchita, because the shchita, the blood comes out, so that's machsher the entire behema. If taka, something happened that no blood came out, so then it still needs hechsher. Halacha ches. Now oichlin shehuchshu ksheim mechubarim lekarka, that they became hukshu while they were mechubar lekarka. Oy shehuchshu b'mayim ha-mechubarim shebekarka. The hechsher is coming, in other words, the peri is taka not mechubar lekarka, but the hechsher is coming with mayim, which is mechubar lekarka. Is any hechsher? That's not a hechsher. Acher yuchshu achar shenekru. First of all, the peri has to be, the food has to be nekar min akarka, and also it has to be b'mayim hatlushim min akarka. It has to be b'mayim hatlushim min akarka. B'shar mashkin. Now b'shar mashkin, there's no difference if it's bekarka or not bekarka. The whole din of bekarka is only a din of mayim. In other words, either b'mayim hatlushim min akarka, b'shar mashkin. Shneme b'chol keli, which means any machshir ad sheyitolish min akarka ke'ein hamayim shebekeli. So it has to be something that's separated. It has to be b'chol keli. Chol keli asher yishasa, it has to be mayim shebekeli, not mayim shebekarka. Nochmer, shav mayim bekeli. If you had the mayim which was already in the keli, and then the nosen bekarka, and then you poured it back into a bear in the karka, is eina machshir. So we're learning over here two dinim. Din pashut. The first din is we're learning the whole time that in order for a food that grows from the ground to become mukshel lekabel tumah, the food has to be separated from the ground. That's din number one. And din number two is that the mayim, which is being machshir this food, in order for the mayim to be able to machshir this food, the mayim has to be separated from the ground. Mashenkin, if the mayim is attached to the ground, so then the mayim is not machshir the food. Now that din is only specially by mayim, and has to be b'chol keli, has to be mayim that's in a keli, not mayim which is in the karka. And nochmer, even if the mayim was already separated, and then you poured it back into the karka, so now this mayim is connected to the karka, so that mayim can be machshir. Now if you put a peri, if you take a peris and you put it into mayim which is in the ground, and then you go ahead and pull out the peris from this bear of mayim, so now the mayim which is on the peris is mayim which is detached from the ground, so that mayim will be machshir. There's no problem. The fact that this mayim that's now on the peri originated from mayim which is attached on the ground is not going to stop this mayim from going ahead and being machshir the peri. The whole din, just like the din would be, l'mashal, if let's say mayim falls on peris while the pears are connected to the ground, and then you go ahead and cut off these pears, and now they're still wet from that mayim that fell on it while it was attached to the ground. So again, it becomes mukhshir. The mayim doesn't have to fall on it while it's detached from the ground, and al derech zeh, the water doesn't have to fall onto the pears while the water is detached from the ground. As long as there's water that's detached from the ground, that's on the pears, or pears that are detached from the ground, that has mayim on it, so it becomes mukshel lekabel tumah. This din that mayim that's in the ground is not mukshel lekabel tumah is talking when the pears are in the mayim. So in other words, you have mayim that's in the on the ground, and now the pears are touching that mayim, and now someone that's tummy is touching this pears. So the din is, since the pears are becoming muksher from mayim which are attached to the ground, and they're still attached to the ground, that mayim never became detached from the ground. So then those pears are not mekabel tumah. Halacha test. So we're learning here that something that's attached to the ground is not mekabel tumah. Now if you have something growing in a flower pot, so it depends. If the flower pot has a hole in it, so then it has a din that it's attached to the ground, and therefore it's also not mekabel tumah. And if the flower pot doesn't have a hole in it, so then it's not considered attached to the ground, and therefore it is mekabel tumah. That's the halacha. Halacha test. Kishus shenota ba'otzitz nokov. It's talking about otzitz nokov, because Mishnah touches up. And v'higdila, and it grew. You planted it in an otzitz nokov, and it grew. Aval pi sheyotzitz chutz la'otziv, it extends beyond the otzitz, is eina mekabelis tumah, it's not mekabel tumah. And why? Because it's nokov. Now v'otzitz shu nokov, when is it considered nokov? Kedei sheyetze be sheirish cotton hareu koretz. It's like a little bit, the wording of the Rambam is like Hilo, the first is one din, and now it's another din. L'chura, it's one din. We're talking about akishas, which were not the otzitz nokov. Now, what's considered an otzitz nokov? V'otzitz shu nokov, kedei sheyetze be'sherish cotton, that has a din hareu ka'aretz, has a din of a ka'aretz, and therefore v'hanatua bei eini mekabel tumah. Something that's planted in it is not mekabel tumah. V'cheinim hoyu b'mayim. If you have water in an otzitz which is nokov, so it's also eini machshir. So that water is not machshir because that water is considered water which is mechuber lekarka. You have an otzitz nokov, and then you have water in that otzitz nokov. So then that water is considered water that's in the ground. Now, halacha yud otzitz she'eni nokov. So if you have an otzitz that has no hole in it, so then hareyan tuah bei mekabel tumah. What planted in it is mekabel tumah because it's not considered attached to the ground. And v'mhoyu mayim b'techen, if there was water in this otzitz she'eni nokov, is machshir because that's considered not attached to the ground. That's the basic din. Now, when do we say on otzitz nokov? Normally, a flower pot is made out of cheres, which is earthenware, but it was an earthenware that was already, it was burnt. It was in a kiln, and therefore it's hard, and therefore in order for it to be able for the shadish, for the roots in the otzitz to be able to penetrate into the earth, it would have to go through a hole. Masha'inkin, if it's made out of a material which is softish, for example, if it's made out of dung, or it's made out of earth a keli that's made out of earth, but it was never made into a cheres. It's a kli adom. A kli adom that's made out of earth, and that earth was never made in a kill. So the mele it's soft. So therefore, even if it doesn't have a hole, it has it in as if it has a hole. That's the halacha. Halacha yudalef. Klei glolim, a keli that's made out of dung, or a klei adom, a keli that's made out of earth, but it was never made into a cheres. It never went into a kill. Sha'asharoshim yechelu lefkeh ben velotzes. Since they're softish, so therefore the roots could go through the actual flower pot, is einam machshirnus azroim. So they are not machshir azroim. In other words, the water that's in that flower pot has a din as if it's in the earth. Even though they're not nekuvim, nevertheless, hareim kinekuvim, they have a din of nekuvim. That's this din. And the Rambam is saying it legabe the din of water. The Rambam is saying it legabe the din of water. The Rambam didn't say it legabe the din of what's growing in it. That's the Rambam didn't say it. Nachamal klei glolim klei adom shasharoshim yechelu lefkeh ben velotzes is einam machshirim esazroim. The water that's in it is not machshir azroim. V'afal pish einam nekuvim areim nekuvim. Halacha yud beis otzitz shemelo offer atzvasei. You have an otzitz which you filled it up with earth until the top of the otzitz. So then eini choshev keli. It's not considered a keli. El hareu kitavlo she'en lo sofa. It's like as if it would be just a piece of wood, or a piece of cheres which has no sofa. She'eni klei kibul. It doesn't have a din of a klei kibul. It doesn't have a din of a klei kibul. Now you have to understand that this din halacha yud beis, an otzet shemelo offer. So Memela doesn't have a din of a keli because it becomes bottle. So it's like a tavla she'en li sofa. Does this have anything to do with behemshel to the din we're learning over here? We're learning over here the din of an otzet nokov and an otzet she'eni nokov. Legabi the dinim of something that grows in the otzets, or to the mayim that's in the otzets. That's the nafkamina that we're learning over here. Now we're learning another din that an otzets that's filled with offer is not called a keli. I mean that's legabi hilchis kelim. Whether it's called a keli, it's not a keli. So does that have any effect? Legabi the dinim that we're learning over here, b'negeya, if something grows in such an otzets. In other words, if you have an otzets that's mulo offer atzvasei, memela there's nothing else in the otzets other than offer. So would that change the status legabi the halachas of something that grows in the otzet? That's already something which is discussed. But the pashtus advarim lechura this din is only legabi hilchas kelim. So it's tzarich. How does it come in over here? Halacha yud gimel mashkim tmeim shenofla ala echlum nitmu. Whereas even though we learned earlier that in order for mashke to be machshir oichel, it has to be nofal berotzen. So here we're learning a new din that if this mashke itself is tamei, so then you don't need that it should be nofal berotzen. In other words, when the mashke is being machshir, and then later on the question is it going to become tamei, so we say it only becomes muchshir if it was nofal berotzen, and then later on it'll become tamei. Mashenka, if this mashke is side going to do the hechsher, and side to do the tumah together, so then the hechsher doesn't have to be berotzen. Nochamal, mashkim tmeim shenoflu ala echlu nitmu afal pi shenoflu shalei berotzen abaylu. Why? Sharei atuma v'hechsher boim keachas. Since the tumah the hechsher boim keachas, we learn out from a pasuk that b'chi agavna. So when the hechsher is separately, and then later on it's going to be v'nofel min nivlosam olav. So then you need the hechsher should be in the eifin of berotzen. Mashenkin, if over here the hechsher and the tumah are coming together, so then the hechsher doesn't have to be berotzen. That's the number one. Now we're saying v'hu shaliyo bekarka. That's only if the mashke that's being machsher is not bekarka. In other words, there's two dinim. There's one din that mayim that's bekarka can be machsher. That's din number one. And now there's another din that normally, in order to be machsher, it has to be berotzen. And then we're saying that if lepel this mayim was l'moshel tamei, so even if it was nafal shlei berotzen is metame. Good. So it takes away the chsarn of shlei berotzen. Masha'inkin, if this mayim is mechuba lekarka, so even though these mayim are tmeim, so you could have a mitzvah of mayim which are tmeim that are now bekarka. In other words, you picked up mayim and you were metame the mayim, and now that mayim is bekarka. So the mayim are in the karka. So that mayim which is in the karka, which is tamei, can be machsher oichlim while it's in the karka. While it's in the karka, it cannot be machsher oichel. It can only be machsher oichel when it's tolish min karka. And that's even if that mayim is mayim tmeim. Halacha yudalit. Kol oichel shenifsad v'nisrach ad she'eini roi l'maychel odom is eini mekabel tumah. So in order for oichel to be mekabel tumah, it has to be something which is still royal achila. If it was nifsad v'nisrach, and it reached a point which is eine royal meichel adam, is eine makabel tumah. V'chein mashke shenisrach v'nifsad, the mashke, ve'ene royal shtiyas adam, a person can't drink it. So then is eine makabel tumah, kederach she'ene mashke, shenemar asher yishasa. In order to be makabel tumah, it has to be a mashke which is makabel tumah. It has to be an oichel which is royal achilas adam, and al der is a mashke which is royal shtiyas adam. Now, if it was already makabel tumah, to be in order to become uis tamei, so we'll learn behemshel that it has to be in a royal achilas kelef. Masha'ink, in order to not to be makabel tumah, as long as it's not royal achilas adam, it's already not makabel tumah. Halachi tesvav. Ha'oir shesholke. Now, normally oir doesn't have enough tumah. It's not makabel tumah. Or ha'oir shesholke, if you went ahead and cooked the oir very well, the hashilya, or hashilya is the placenta, shechishiv oleh lachila. So inside the air shesholke, inside the shilya, without being sholke, that shechishiv oleh lachila is mistamin tumas ochlin b'fnei atzman. So until now we learned that if you have the oir mechuber lebasar, so it can become a yad to the basar. Mashenkin over here, if you were oir shesholke, or the shilya, which chishiv oleh lachila, is mistame tumas ochlin b'fnei atzman. However, halacha tezayin eir hachamer shesholke, if it's an eir hachamer, it does ariz a suffix in mistame tumas ochlin b'fnei atzman. Mipnei shesholke, yeini mistame mipnei shehu mos harbi. Because since the eir hachamer is mos harbi, so there's a tzad in Gemara that maybe even if sholke, it's not going to help it to be mistame tumas ochlin. Even if choshev olav, even if choshev olav lachila, but be'etzem, since it's be'etzem mos, so memela it's ein roi to fachila even with choshev. Halacha yud zayin. Chitim shebegloli bokar u'se'erim, shebegloli bokar, or se'erim shebegloli abehema shalichta. Now, the behema ate chitim or se'erim, and he never digested it, and it came out with the golol. With the golol came out the chitim. So it came out chitim whole. They came out chitim as they went in. But lepel their mos is a makabel tumah because it's mos. It's a mos that it's part of the golol. However, if you had in mind that you want to eat it, so then it's mistamis tumas ochlin because be'etzem it's royal lachila. Just normally a person wouldn't want to eat it because it's a davar mos. But if it is chishav olav lachila, so then it can be mistamis tumas ochlin. Halacha yudches kol oichel shenitma va'achar shenitma nifsad v'nisrach. Now we learned before that if you have an oichel which is no longer royal achilas adam, so it loses shem oichel. In other words, in order for an oichel to be makabel tumah, it has to be an oichel for adam. Either it's mechatchila bepastos for adam or niyachid la'adam. But if it reaches a point where it's ein royal achilas adam, so it's no longer a din oichel memela. It's not makabel tumah. But that's legabe kabbalas tumah. Now we're talking about if it was already makabel tumah. Now that the tumah should go off. So for that, it's not enough that it's ein royal achilas adam. It has to be ein royal achilas kelev. That's what we're learning here. Kol eichel shenitma, va'achar shenitma nifsad v'nisrach, it became not roy, is a nifsal milechel kelef. If it became so puzzled that it's, even a kelef can't eat it, a shiyovish kacheres, so it became so dry that mamish like a cheres, like a shard, is a rezer tor. However, v'im nifsal milechel adam, abav adayin hu roy lekelev, so then is a rezer tor mikshoya. It knows it still retains its original tumah, even though it's not royal adam, but as long as it's royal kelef. And that's the number one. And then the Ram continues, v'chol ha'echlum shenitmu, ein lem tara b'mikveh. There's no mutzig of putting an oichel in a mikveh. It's not chamol. So if you have an oichel that's tamei, if this oichel became uis royal achilas kelef, or it became so dry that it's kecheres, so then it becomes uis tamei. Halacha yutes, zroim tmeim shezorim. You had seeds which were tamei and you planted them. Is what grows from those seeds is tor. Because you planted them in the ground and then something grew from it, it's tor. Now, there's certain seeds that the seeds disintegrate, they decompose, and then things grow. So over there, so the original seed is no longer here, and what grew is completely something new, so then it's tor. Now, what happens when you have seeds which really don't disintegrate? It's just that from those seeds grows something else. So then that's what he's saying, that afilu b'davar she'ein zarikola, what grows from something that ein zarikola is also tor. However, that's on the condition v'hu she'ishrishu. That's the condition that in order for it to be Torah, what grows from Dover She'ein Zarikola is if the seed, which ain't Zarikola, but Lepel, it became Nishish and Karka. In other words, it got roots and it became rooted into the Karka. So then what grows from it is Torah. Avol Kedem Ashrosha, but if you have, let's say, a seed, which ain't Zarikola, and from it grew something, and Lepel, this original seed never became Nishish in the Karka, so then Hareim B'tumasim, then they remain tummy. So then they remain tummy. So the seed becomes tummy, and al derezeh what grows from it, but pashtus is also tummy. And then the Rambam says, "V'afilu b'davar shezari kola." I mean, what's the chiddush? In other words, you have the original seed, and you put it in the ground, and lepel, you're waiting for it. In other words, it's not nothing is going to grow until zari kola, But lepel, we're saying, if this thing was not nishrash, so bepashta, so it's not zarikola either. So it wasn't nishrash and it wasn't zarikola. So memela, the original seed is still here. So even though you're waiting for it, as you put it into the ground bepashtas, al minas that it's going to be zarikola, but nevertheless until it's zarikola, so it's still considered an oichel and it's makabel tum. It's nochamal. If you have a seed that was tummy and from that seed grew something else, so if it was zarikola and it grew something else, so it's avada. It's Torah, even if it wasn't Zarikola, but Lepel, it took root, and then it grew something else, so it becomes Torah. And also the original seed that was put into the ground, even though it never disintegrated, also becomes Kola. That's what the Rambam brings from the Rogat Shover. So that's these two Eifanim. If it didn't take root, so and something grew from it, that's also Tamei. And also, obviously, not obviously, but the original seed that was put there, even if it was almanas that it should disintegrate, is also tamei. Masha'inkin, if it took root or it disintegrated, so then what grows from it is not tamei. Halacha chaf. Ochlin shemechubarim lekelim. It was a normal thing, vaistuis. If you have a keli which has, let's say, a hole in it, and you would have, let's say, some dough, and you'd put it into the hole in order to stuff that hole. So the dough was oichel, which was makabel tumah, and now it became part of the keli. Oichlem shemechubarim lekeli. So botlu miteiras eichel, they lose their shem eichel, and mimitma keli are mistam b'tumas hakeli. They become part of the keli. So mele they assume the tumas hakelim. Hail they mishamshim tashmashesh. They're using the same tashmas of a piece of wood. Therefore harein kates, even though bansam they're oichel. Halacha chafalf. Kol mashke shenitma. Mashke they became tomei. And va'achar shenitma nifsad v'nisrach. Now the Zayin mashkin are the ones that could become tamei, and after it became tamei, it became nifsad v'nisrach. So the din is hareze b'tumasi le'elam. Shein hamashke yetze ayidei hakel ulev le'elam. So in other words, even though we learned before that oichel, when it becomes einu roy lachilas kelef, so at that point in time it loses its tumah, but by mashke there's no such a din, because Rambam says ein hamashke yetze ayidei kelev le'elam. So the Pashtus Advar means to say that even if it became Einu Roy Lachilas Kelev, it still retains its din Tumal Mashka. Some want to touch that there's no such messias of Mashka becoming Einu Roy Lachilas Kelev. A Kelev will always be able to drink Mashka at any state of point in time. Not sure. Then the Rambam says, the Ein Le Mashka Shenit Matara, something that's Mashka can never become Torah. There's no messias of Mashka becoming Torah. Chutz min hamayim bulvad. The only mashka that could become Torah is only mashka. Shem hitpil mayim tmeim b'mikveh. Once you were matpil the mayim tmeim b'mikveh, really it's not really a gather of tefillah. It's the pshat is because you were mechaber the mayim with the mikveh is kiven shetzofa mea mikveh aleim. Once the mea mikveh flows over this mayim is Torah, so this mayim becomes Torah. Now the gather of the Torah is more of a hashoka. It's not a gather of a tefillah. The pshat is because this mayim becomes bottled to the mayim of the mikveh. Mele, since it becomes bottled to the mayim of the mikveh, so mele it becomes uis mayim. It becomes uis mayim tvei. Matbilim chamin b'tzeinen, v'tzeinen b'chamin, v'roim b'yofen, v'yofen b'roim. In other words, even though there are different types of water, this is cold, this is hot, or this is good water and this is not such good water, nevertheless, as long as you connect the two waters, you take the mayim tmeim and you connect it with the mikveh water, so it becomes Torah. Halacha chav beis makel shimalei mashkim tmeim. You have a stick which is filled with mashkim tmeim. It's wet with mashkim tmeim, and v'hitbel miktzasa b'mikveh. And part of that stick was put into the mikveh. Is leitaru hamayim shal miktzasa. The mayim which is al miktzasa, So the Bartanura teaches that miktsasa means the miktsasa which is out of the mikveh. In other words, the part of the makal which is out of the mikveh is not toir, achiyat bilas kula. So in other words, even though l'chura, this water is connected to this water, but that's with the principle of katafris, any chibur. So in other words, since there's water that's flowing on top of something, and it's not b'mokim shel mid, it's not in a place which is a flat place or a place where they're all gathered together. So then it doesn't become tor. So b'kitzur, the mayim which is on the stick which is outside the mikveh doesn't become tor through the water which is in the stick in the mikveh. That's the pashtus of one. And l'chura it comes out that the water that's on the stick in the mikveh becomes tor. That's the pashtus because it became part of the mikveh. Now l'shayla, you're going to take the stick out. I mean, right now the water became tor. You're going to take the stick out. So sort of that stick is going to be wet. And l'chura, that wetness is going to be touching the water which is on the stick which is outside the mikveh. So l'chura, that stick is, since that water is still wet, so l'chura, why shouldn't it be matami, that water? And how will there be a hechatimtza that the water which is on this part of the stick, which is in the mikveh, became tor? In other words, once you take the stick out of the mikveh, so l'chura, so you have still water which is wet, which is tame on the mikveh. So I'm not really sure how it's not going to be matame the rest of it. I mean, the katafris is taken out a chibur, but lepel, when this piece of water touches this piece of water, so l'chura it's matame. Mayim tmeim is matame b'kolshu. Mayim matame b'kolshu, and they're mistame b'kolshu. So even though the mashal there is an katafris, and the top part of the katafris is tame, so l'chura, the bottom part of the katafris should also be tame. I'm not really sure. I'll call upon that's the halacha. Nachamol makel shimulei mashkim tmeim. You have a makel which is filled with water which is tummy, and then the heat bill miktsase b'mikveh, and part of the makel you put into the mikveh is leitaru hamayim shal miktsase. The mayim al miktsase. The Ram doesn't. The passage means the miktsase which is out of the mikveh. Over here he meant miktsase in the mikveh. Now he's talking about miktsase which is out of the mikveh. Is leitaru hamayim shal miktsase, the part that's out of the mikveh doesn't become tar. Achiyat bilas kula, until your table is kula. So now you have that part of that mayim which is tummy. Now what happens behemshach? Because once you take the stick out, the Ram doesn't say it. I mean, at this point in time, that part of the stick is in the mikveh. That mayim became tar. Now once you take it out, so you have wetness. I mean, you have wetness of it. So l'chura, it should become tummy. I'm not really sure. Halacha chav gimel. Shelig shenitma. You have shelig which became tummy. And vihishik miktsasi l'mei mikvah. Now part of that shelig you put into the main mikvah. In other words, you connected it to the main mikvah. Is hail the tar miktsasi. Since part of the shelig is connected to the mikvah, is tar kule. They're all connected. It's all connected. So it's like a chidush. Even though we learned earlier that the flakes of the shelig are considered separate, and therefore when one flake becomes tummy, the other flake doesn't become tummy, unless they're all in a keli of cheres. That's what we learned at the end of Perek Aleph. That unless they're all in a keli of cheres, if one of it touches, one part of the shelig touches the tumas, so the rest of the shelig is not tummy. But over here, if we have all the shelig is tummy, and now you touch some of the shelig is touching the mikvah, so that shelig connects all the shelig. So in other words, even though l'chura they're separate, nevertheless we say that this particle becomes connected to this particle, and they all become connected. So b'negeh the stick, it's like you have to understand the havanas advarim. By a stick, we say that even though there is a stick, and part of the stick is in the mikveh, and the rest of the stick is wet, so the wetness which is on the top part of the stick, on the part of the stick that's sticking out of the mikveh, is not connected to the mikveh, because it's a katafris. Katafris ain't a chibur. Mashenkin over here, a shelig, even though the flakes are really separate flakes, but nevertheless, since one flake is touching the other flake, they all become connected, and therefore it's considered that connected to the mikveh, and therefore all the shelig becomes tar. It needs bira. And the Ramar talks about it. He discusses it. It's he's masber that by katafris it's not a chibur, and by shelig it is a chibur. Yeah. Halacha chavdalit. Hatemed hatomi. Temed is a drink that they would make the drink. They would put water on top of the the rind of the grapes. After you'd press out all the grapes, and you'd have the grapes, and you'd have the shalachs of the grapes and the pits of the grapes, which has somewhat of a residue of wine, and then you'd put water on it, and it would become like a certain color. It would get the color of the wine, but it would really be water because there was no real wine there. There was just mamish water. However, because it had this residue of the grapes, so it ferments. So until it ferments, it still has temet has a din of water because it's really water. It's just water with a little bit residue of grapes in it. Masha'inkin, once it ferments, so it changes its mitzias, it turns from water into temet, which fermented, which is a different mashke. So then is hatemed hatomi, temet which is tummy. Bein shenit nitma achar shetimdei, whether it became tummy after you made it into temet, and bein shetimdei b'mayim tmeim, or you made it tummy with mayim which were originally tummy. So actually hichmetz, if it's still temet, which didn't ferment, so mele basically it's regular water, is mashike b'mikveh v'yitar. So then you connect it to a mikveh and it becomes Torah. As we learned before, the water could be connected to a mikveh and become Torah. So all that is that this temed, since this temed never became hichmetz, so it still has the din of mayim and therefore it becomes Torah. Sharehu kemayim, because it has the din of mayim. However, mishe hichmetz, once this temed became hichmetz, it fermented, so then harei yayin, it loses its din mayim, it gets its din yayin, which means that it cannot no longer become Torah b'mikveh. Memela ve'in Torah b'mikveh. There's no musig of Torah b'mikveh. Halacha chavhei. Kdeira shemila mashkin. You have a pot which you filled it up with mashkin, which not water. We're talking about one of the zayin mashkin, except for water. Kegen dvash v'yayin u'kiyetzeben. So you filled it up with one of the zayin mashkin. Unesuna b'teicha mikveh, and you put this kdeira in the mikveh. So you have a kdeira in a mikveh. And this Gdeira is filled with wine or with honey or whatever, with a mashke, which is not water. Now, upashet harishon l'tumah es yodei v'nogabo. So a person that's a rishon l'tumah puts his hand into the mikveh and he touches inside this pot. Now the din is harezim metamis hamashkin. A rishon l'tumah is metame mashkin. Now, afal pishi b'techa mikveh, even though this mashke is b'techa mikveh, abalapel the mashke didn't lose its status of being mashke. Whereas the yayin, you have a pot of yayin that's in a mikveh, it doesn't lose its status of being a pot of wine, yayin, and yayin could be makabel tumah. Water is not water. A mikveh is not makabel tumah. Whereas with the water that's in the mikveh is not makabel tumah. But the yayin that's in the mikveh, since it's separate from the water, it's not mixed with the water, it's in a pot. So memela, it's makabel tumah. So the yayin was makabel tumah. Now, as a result of the fact that the yayin was makabel tumah, is memela is v'nitma hagdeira machmas amashkin shebetecha. So now the pot, the rishon l'tumah can be metame a pot, but the rishon l'tumah could be metame the yayin which is in the pot. And now, once the yayin in the pot becomes tamei, so the rule is that mashkin tmeim could be metame a keli. That's a special din d'Rabbanan. The mashkin tmeim could be metame a keli. So now the k'deira becomes tamei in afa pisha b'teicha mikvah, and that k'deira will always be tamei because pashtus a k'deira is made out of cheres, and cheres will always be tamei. So this k'deira is tamei. So this rishon sticks his hand into the mikvah. He puts his hand into the mashke which is in the k'deira. He's metame the k'deira. And memela he's metame and he's metame the mashke in the gdeira, and that mashke in the gdeira is metame the gdeira. That's talking about if it was a mashke which wasn't water. However, hoysem aleya mayim, if it was filled with water, so that water which is in the gdeira cannot become tamei from the rishon because it's part of the mikveh is akdeira teira. Because she'ena rishon metame klicheres leilam. The fact that the rishon is going to touch the klicheres can become the stam. A rishon can be metame klicheres. But a rishon could be metame the mashke, and the mashke would be metame the klicheres. So if there was mashke that other than water in this keli, so the rishon was metame the mashke, and that mashke was metame the klicheres. Masha'inkin, if there was only water there, so the rishon couldn't be metame the water because the water is a part of the mikveh, it becomes bottled to the mikveh, and memela the rishon can't be metame the keli. The mayim aren't tmeim, so a rishon won't be able to be metame the keli. However, poshet avatum is yodiv v'nogaba. If you have an avatuma, which an avatuma could be metame a keli, so he stuck in his hand into the mikveh and he touched the keli, so then is nitma k'deira, then the k'deira is tummy. She'ena mikveh metar klicheres, because the mikveh can't be metar klicheres. So mele the keli becomes tummy in the mikveh, and that mikveh will never, and that keli will remain tummy. Is bekitzer. In order for a rishon to be matama a keli which is in a klicheres, is only if the klicheres has in it mashkin other than water. So mele the rishon is matama the mashkin, and that mashkin is matama the klicheres. But the rishon can never be matama klicheres. Masha'en can if there's water there, so the water doesn't become tamei, and mele and the klicheres also doesn't become tamei. Masha'en can an av enochinami, the av is not going to be able to matama the water, but the av will be able to be matama the klicheres, because the klicheres is makabel tumah from an av. Halacha Chavov. Mei shviches means water. We'd call it like sewage water. In other words, water which was used already. Lav dafke mamish. Water that was used already. That's called mei shviches. Dirty water which was used, which you pour out. So the din is hareim becheskes tumah. The pashas we assume that mei shviches is water which was used, so they're becheskes tumah. Now yardu aleim kshamim. If the rain fell onto these meishviches, so the din is imrabu aleim. If there's more rainwater than the meishviches there, so then harein teherin. So the whole amount, all the water over there is start. Again, you started off with meishviches, and then meishviches was becheskes tmeim, was becheskes tuma, and then it was yardu aleim meikshamim, and now there's more meikshamim than the original meishviches. Is harein teherin. Mechza lemechza hakel tami, and this din is bein bekelim bein bekarkois. This din is whether these meishviches and the meiksham are in a keli or it's in the karka. Either way, we say that if there was originally meishviches which were becheskes tuma, and then yardu alei meiksham, and now there's more meiksham than meishviches, it's tor. Emasai, all this din is only bisman shekodmu meishvicha. If we started off with meishviches, which was becheskes tuma, and then it fell on it make shamim, so then we say that make shamim is considered, it's all Torah. Aval im kodma make sham. But if we started off with the make sham, and then v'yardu aleim kolshim and meishviches, and then meishviches fell onto make shamim is akel tami. Shemashkin tmeim sheyardu l'teirim mitamim b'kolshim, because mashkin tmeim which falls into mashkin teirim, so the mashkin tmeim is mitami the teirim. So melas you can't have. You have more make sham. What do you mean you have more make shamim? The make shamim itself became tummy through the fact that the meishviches fell into the make shamim. So the make shamim became tummy. Now the question is fakert. Good. So we understand why if meishviches falls into make shamim, everything is tummy, because the tummy is mitami the Torah. But we don't. It's hard to understand why when the make shamim falls into the meishviches and it's rabu make sham al the meishviches, it's everything Torah. Why don't we say that the meishamim which fell into the make shviches became tummy? The Rambam brings from the Mekeves HaMishnah that pshat is that the make shamim, when they're still in the clouds, they're like considered mechuber. It's like we learned before, mechuber lekarka. In order for a water that was mechuber lekarka to become tummy, they have to become nitlu shuberatzim. There's a din that water that's mechuber lekarka, in order for them to become tummy, they have to be nitlu shuberatzim. So all there is a make shamim, in order for the make shamim to become tamei, so they have to be nitlu shuberatzin. And if these make shamim are falling into meishviches, so they're not really nitlu shuberatzin. If they're not nitlu shuberatzin, so mele they're not mekabel tumah. If they're not mekabel tumah, so eventually when you have more make shamim which weren't mekabel tumah, then the meishviches that were there originally, so mele the meishviches become bottled in the make shamim, and mele nothing is tamei. So no, the Nekudas Advarim is that the Mekshamim that are falling into the Mekshviches, Shalei Bertzeinei, those Meksham aren't Mekabel Tumah, and since they're not Mekabel Tumah, so mainly you have water over there in the Meshviches which aren't Tumah. Once there's a Roiv Mekshamim, so the Meshviches become bottled to the Meksham. Halacha Chav Zayin, Aterev is Gagas, someone that's washing his roof, or V'amachabes is Ksusi, is washing his clothes. V'harei menatfen, and as a result of washing it. Now, the water that he washed it with, that's called meshviches. That's water that was used water. And now this water is dripping. So that water that's dripping is the dripping of meshviches, which is tummy. Now, yardu aleim kshamim, rain fell, and v'arabu anatifes, and now the drips became larger drips. So that is harei rabu meksham aleim. That means that there's more mekshamim there than the original water. And memelev anet v'mem teir. That's this din. That since anet v'mem, notice originally it was small drops. Now you have bigger drops. So mele those bigger drops, we understand that they're more than the original. They're more than half of the original drops. They're rive. So Mamela, since they're Rav, so Mamela we say that what drips now from the roof or from the clothes is considered Robe Meksham, Mamela it's Torah. Halacha Chavches, Hasoch Shemen Torah. A person smears on himself Shemen Torah, and then V'nitma Zeh Adam, this person became Tomei after he smeared the oil on him. And then, now L'chura, when he became Tomei, he became Tomei, and L'chura, the oil on him is also Tomei. The oil becomes Tomei from him. And then V'tovel, and then he was Tevel, Varei HaShemen Al Psari. Now the Shemen is still on his flesh. Now as we learned, Shemen cannot become Torah through Tefillah. Now, in order for the Shemen to have a din of Torah, we have to say that the Shemen is bottled to him. And Memela, Agav, that he became Torah, the Shemen also became Torah. Mehilchasa, that the Shemen is bottled to him. Zazeh. If it wasn't anything more than the amount of Shemen that would require in order to smear a small limb of a little child, of a baby, the Aver cotton, the small toe of a little baby, so then it's Areu Tor. Then the Shemen is considered Tor. Since the Shemen started off as being Tomei. So even though he became Tomei, while he became Tomei, Bepashtus, the Shemen was also had a din of Tomei. And Shemen itself can't really be Toivel in a mikvah, but since the Shemen is on him, and it's so little amount, so it's considered as part of him, and Memela, just like he became Tor, the Shemen also became Tor. That's talking about when he started off with Shemen Tomei, a Shemen Tor. He was Tor, the Shemen was Tor, and then he became Tomei. Together with him, the Shemen became Tomei, and together with him, the Shemen becomes Tor because the Shemen is part of him. However, Soch Shemen Tomei, if he smeared Shemen Tomei on him, and now the Shemen was Mamish Tomei independent of him, and now V'toval, then he went ahead and he was Tevel, he's Tomei, and the Shemen is Tomei, is late Torah Hashem Sholevs. Since the Shemen is Tomei, and Shemen doesn't become Tor b'mikvah, so the Shemen can become Tor. Ella im nishim imenu mashke tifeach. If there's still mashke tifeach, if there's still wetness, there's enough Shemen on him to make something else wet, so then that's considered Shemen, and that Shemen didn't become Tor. However, im nishim imenu mashke tifeach, if there's a certain wetness of the mashke still left on him, is a Harei Hashem Lutamasi, the Shemen remains Tomei. However, if there's not enough Shemen on him to cause something else to become wet, so then it's bottled b'miyuteh, then it's bottled b'miyuteh. Even though the Shemen was originally Tomei, but now that the Shemen was smeared on him, the Shemen becomes bottled to him, and Memela, when he's Tevel, so the Shemen, which is on him, also becomes Torah. Now the shir is that it's mashke tifech. Now, normally we say tifech, there's a musik called tifech amnas latfiach. In other words, it's so wet that if someone touches it, so that touch will be able to cause something else to become wet. So in other words, it's not only it's wet, and a third will become wet from him. Something will touch it and be matpiach something else. Over here, the Rambam doesn't say tifech amnas latpiach. So the shaila is whether over here taka you need tifech amnas latpiach. That's a machlekes achrein. There's nochamal. If you put on shemen tor, as long as it's not more kedei sichas aver cotton. So this Shemen Tor, which became Tomei, well, he became Tomei, becomes Tor when he becomes Tor, when he's Tevel. Mashengen, if he puts on Shemen Tomei, so then the Shemen is not going to become Tor together with him, because Shemen doesn't become Tor with Tvila, only if the Shemen becomes Ui Shemen. In other words, if there's so little Shemen that it's not even Amanas Latfiach, so it becomes bottled to him, Memela, when he's Tevel, so he's Tor, and Memela, and there's no Shemen to really be Metamek.